and welcome to another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. If you're watching me on a video right now, you should know that this is not really a podcast. This is what you're watching is a video. I'm talking about podcasting. If you want to get the podcast, it's available at podcastpontifications.com. This wraps up my 4-part mini-series in change, or about change. And today, I'm going to drop a bomb, as the kids say these days. Actually, I'm not sure the kids say this anymore. I'm going to drop a piece of information that you may not like, because you know me, I'm a weirdo. I like change. Change is fun. So far, we've been talking about how you might want to change your relationship with your hosting provider. You might want to actually change your mind about how and why you do the podcast you do. I said why twice, whatever. Changing also your physical space. But today, the thing which I'm going to talk about is the fact that this crazy, tumultuous time of change that we're seeing in early 2019 as I recorded this, it's just the beginning. That's right. Podcasting as we know it today is going through fantastic rates of change, and that is going to increase. You want the hockey stick for podcasting? That hockey stick is going to be growth. Not growth of podcasting, excuse me. That hockey stick change is going to be the rate of change. The delta, if you will. Huge change coming. And what I want to do on the program today is give you some very practical tips. What, Evo? Giving practical tips? Yeah, I know it's crazy. I want to give you very practical tips on how you can be apprised of these changes. If in fact you want to. You're a working podcaster. You should be apprised of these changes. So I'm going to give you some practical tips on how to do that. Oh, and by the way, if you're driving or you don't have access to a pencil, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. I have links to all of this in the show notes. So everything I'm going to talk to you about, I'll make sure that's linked. So if you are, driving, great, just hold on. Don't delete the episode. Make sure that you stop it halfway before it ends or right there. But yeah, you'll be able to click through on your device or go to the website. All right, here's a practical tip so that you can stay ahead of the change. Tip number 1. Well, you're already doing it, man. You're already doing a great job by listening to me. Awesome. That's great and fine. But seriously, that's one thing, and that's great and that's fine. But there's got to be more than just me, because there are a lot of changes happening in podcasting I'm not talking about. So the single best source, I think, that is currently reporting on what's happening in podcasting on a daily basis. Oh my God, I know you're scared, but that's how fast things are changing here. His name is James Cridland, and he has a publication called podnews.net. Podnews.net. Yes, I'm plugging for James' show. It's great. It's a newsletter if you want to read it that way. He also releases it as a very short, 3-minute podcast. So if you just want the highlights in your ears, if that's better for you, fantastic. But James puts this newsletter out daily. That sure doesn't on weekends. It comes out of the UK, and it's very, very well done. Short, concise, just the things that are important that he has found in podcasting on a daily basis. So podnews.net is my number one recommendation. You, listening to my show right now, you should also be listening to James or reading James's words. I read his words every single day. Totally. Do it. Practical advice tip number 2. If you want more than that, if you also want to get some commentary and you want to get some other people's thoughts and opinions of what's happening in the podcasting space, and maybe not nearly as cutting edge, although sometimes it certainly is, but also more reflective of what's happened recently, something like the Podcast Business Journal is a great resource where you can see what other people have to say about that. And outside of the Podcast Business Journal, if that's too inside baseball for you, okay, that's fine. Maybe it is. I would recommend I would recommend you find 1 or 2 of lots of other podcasting newsletters that are out there. Bellow Collective has one. Sky Pillsbury does one. There's a whole series of podcast newsletters out there. Many of them focus on the types of things you're likely interested in. So go subscribe to some of those. Okay, that's tip number 1, which is get the news from the people who are talking about the things you need to hear about inside of podcasting. Tip number 1. Tip number 2 is think about and find your tribe. I guess if I had to summarize it in a statement that has been overused, find your tribe. Find your tribe of other podcasters who are podcasting the kind of stuff you are podcasting. And listen to those shows. If you do nothing else, listen to those shows. Listen, this show it's a PAP. It's a podcast about podcasting. I do a very different take than most podcasts about podcasting, but it's a podcast about podcasting. So, therefore, I subscribe to a couple dozen other podcasts about podcasting, and I'm not joking. I think it's at least 24. It might be 27 different podcasts about podcasting that I personally subscribe to. You don't have to do that. I'm not suggesting you do that. But what is your podcast about? That is the kind of content you should also be subscribing to. All of them. Now, you don't have to listen to every second of all of them, but you have to subscribe to all of them. Yes, even the new ones. Yes, even the ones that are terrible. You need to be listening to all of the shows, or as many as you can possibly fit, that podcast about the same kind of stuff you podcast about. Because they're going to be up to date. They're going to be doing things somewhere, a large enough swath. Something's going to happen on those shows, and you're going to think, should I incorporate that into mine? What's the competition doing? I mean, the change doesn't just come from within the podcasting industry. The change might come from your industry, the thing you're interested in. And if you're not following up with what's going on there, and specifically what people are podcasting about, yeah, it's great that you're following the newsletters of what's happening in your real industry, but what are people podcasting about? This is the change we're talking about. It's the change inside of podcasting. Whether or not that comes from the podcast as a technology, as a podcasting as a service, or podcasting as content, you need to understand what the other ones are doing. Build your tribe, at a minimum by listening to the shows. Here's a pro tip. Maybe there's a network, not necessarily a network that you're thinking, not a podcast network. Maybe the people that produce this kind of content are already talking to one another. Are you part of that conversation? And if they're not talking to one another, well, maybe you could start a Slack channel. Or I guess a Facebook group, I don't care. Some other method, I guess a Discord server, whatever, it doesn't really matter to me. But if you're going to build this tribe of people that you're listening to, is there a place to collaborate? Now, you might be thinking about, well, that's dealing with the competition, Evo. It's not. I promise you, it is not. Podcasting is not a zero-sum game. People tend to listen to lots of podcasts. I know the average number is 7. But you got to remember, averages are averages, right? That means all of the ones, lots and lots and lots of ones that counteract the other number. So it's not competition, it's co-opetition. I want you to think about your fellow podcasters who make the similar content that you make, the similar content to yours. They podcast about the same things you podcast about. Build that tribe for co-opetition so you can cooperate as well as compete, but it's cooperation, sharing tips, techniques, and all that kind of fun stuff. Why should you not? And if no one is leading that charge, you should lead it. I'm involved in a very active Slack group with a bunch of OG podcasters. It's very helpful. It's very, very helpful, so you should build the same thing. So there you go. Those are my top 2 tips for you. Number 1, go subscribe to podnews.net right now and find other things inside the podcasting industry that you can follow, either from a podcast perspective or from a newsletter perspective, the inside baseball of podcasting, business journal again. And then build your tribe. You do the work. Find the other people who podcast about the things you podcast about and listen to them, number 1. And then start communicating, collaborating, co-opetitioning, the terrible word, with them. That's what you should do. Now, if you're a business owner out there and you're thinking, man, there's a lot of work to this podcasting stuff, Evo, I just want you to stay on top of the changes. Okay. A couple of dozen clients rely on me to do just that. I launch podcasts and keep them running for businesses all over the world. Go to podcastlaunch.pro to see a list of all the services I offer my clients, and you can reach out to me, evo@podcastlaunch.pro. That's it. See you guys next week for more podcast pontifications. Cheers.